Okay, next up, let's look at this left-hand inspector. Now you'll notice that you've got a few different panes to use here. Visibility shows you what you see here. If I've got lots of tracks, you can say, I actually want that track, but I don't want to see it. You've got both selected, similar to visibility in Pro Tools, where you can choose what you want to see. That's your visibility part there. I, for example, don't want to see a lane here or a track here for my stereo output. That's like a master track, so I'm going to hide that. But my inspector is what I really want to look at. When I've got a track selected, you can't make that one bigger, it's a fixed width. And this has a lot of control. So much so that I actually don't use my big mixer very much, because between this guy and that E that I skipped on purpose, I can set everything that I need to set without going to a mixer. So let's look at what you can do here. Now the first part of that duplicates the buttons I've already shown you here, but it's got a few extra ones. It's got stuff that I'm not going to get into now in terms of fade settings and freeze tracks, but what I do want to show you here is this is the same as your main fader. In fact, if I open the mixer, you will notice that that is just a mini version of the fader, and if I change the fader, that's my master volume. Command click resets to unity gain, and our panning, it's panned left 2 for some reason, so let's reset that to the middle. This is my offset, my delay. So if I know that my microphone at the back of my auditorium is 17 milliseconds later than the one close to the piano, and actually want to time align them without manually dragging the clips, I can put a delay forward or backwards of any track here. You can have track presets in terms of things that are already on the track that you can save and recall. But as I've shown you already, this is where you choose the input and then also the output of this track. For now, it's going straight to your master bus, your master output stereo out. But when we start looking at stems and groups and routing, then this is going to become important to route your output of a track to the equivalent of an aux bus in Pro Tools, which we call a group track in Cubase and Nuendo. I've already mentioned the tracks versions. This is where you can control them. More specifically, not going to get into that in this basic video. Chord tracks, also very useful for music. Going to skip that. And that brings us to the stuff that you might want to use. Now, each track has a built-in equalizer. Very useful. And one reason you might want to use built-in stuff like EQ and channel strips is it's really compatible between versions and different systems. So if I only use all the built-in stuff on the track, I know this project's going to sound exactly the same at home versus at open window. Where if you're using external plugins, if they're not available, things change. So I would highly recommend using this equalizer, and I'll show you a few more built-in channel strip plugins that are quite stable and high quality. Also, if you want to open a project you did in Cubase 5 years ago, they maintain the compatibility very well, whereby the older version of the plugin, external plugin you may have used 5 years ago, you don't have anymore, or it's not on the system. It helps you for basic stuff there. So that's your equalizer section. I'm not setting anything here because I want to show you a different place where I find it easier to work with this. But next up, this is your insert menu. Now, all the plugins on your machine will show up in these different categories. And the nice thing, similar to Reaper, is you can search for stuff. So if I want a compressor, you type in compressor, you load the compressor, and there we have your built-in Steinberg compressor straight on the track. You can right click and say no effect to discard it. You can also bypass it. So that's the little bypass button there. Or you can bypass all your plugins at the same time with a global bypass over there. You can see it's grayed out. Or the E, that's always your editor where you set more settings. So that opens the plugin. But in the case of plugins, you can just click on the name and it opens the plugin anyway. So I'm going to remove the compressor again. It does ask you, are you sure? I'm discarding it. And you'll see there's a green line over here. Now, you should know the difference between pre-fade and post-fade inserts. Everything at the top, it says there, pre-fade. And you actually have 14 pre-fade slots here and 2 post-fade slots. But if you need more post-fade slots, you just drag the green line. And you can see then everything below the green line becomes a post-fade insert. And you can see that also by the color, it becomes a greener, sea green kind of color when you've got it post fade. And if I drag it up to pre-fade, it becomes a more blue color. You can reorder inserts very easily by dragging them in this insert slot over there. Next up, your sends. Again, these are all post fade sends by default. And we'll get back to sends and routing and effects tracks a bit later, but this is where you set up sends. I'm not going to sidetrack myself now and do that, but we will come back to sends. And then your fader, you actually have a copy of your mixer fader right here, which you can change. You can do all the standard fader stuff right here in a copy of that. And quick controls are things that you can set up, kind of macros or commands that you want, a quick one-button way of doing something, which is also beyond what we want to do in this video.